Welcome to the Black Excellence and Abundance Channel.
The Harlem Hell Fighters, the most celebrated African American regiment in World War I. They confronted racism even as they trained for war. They helped bring jazz to France, then battled Germany longer than almost any other American doughboys.
Their nickname's origin is unclear. It was possibly given to them by enemy soldiers, the American press, or both. Like their predecessors in the Civil War and successors in the wars that followed, these African American troops fought a war for a country that refused them basic rights, and their bravery stood as a rebuke to racism, a moral claim to first-class citizenship. They were mostly New Yorkers, the first black troops in their state's National Guard. After years of lobbying by civic leaders from Harlem, Manhattan's celebrated black neighborhood, Governor Charles Whiteman finally formed the all-black unit, first known as the 15th New York National Guard Regiment, in 1916 as the U.S. prepared for possible entry into World War I. The majority of enlistees actually came from Harlem, which was home to 50,000 of Manhattan's 60,000 African Americans in the 1910s. Others came from Brooklyn, towns up the Hudson River, and New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. Some were teens, some in their mid-40s. Some were porters, doormen, or elevator operators. Some teachers, night watchmen, or mailmen. Their motives included adventure, patriotism, and pride. Quote, "To be somebody, you had to belong to the 15th Infantry," end quote, wrote enlistee Arthur P. Davis of Harlem. Even before combat, the regiment faced unjust challenges from fellow Americans. In October 1917, 6 months after the official U.S. entrance into the war, they trained for combat in Jim Crow-ruled Spartanburg, South Carolina. There, the regiment pledged to follow an unusual military discipline. Haywood asked them to respond to racist insults and threats with fortitude and without retaliation, but to report any incidents to military authorities. Quote, "There had been all kind of insults hurled at us who were on duty in town," end quote, wrote musician Noble Sissel in his memoir. Quote, "Our boys had some pretty bitter pills to swallow," end quote. Sissel himself was kicked and called a racial slur by a hotel's proprietor when he stopped in to get some newspapers. 100 black and white soldiers gathered at the hotel's entrance, quote, "bent on seeking restitution," end quote, Sissel wrote. But Lieutenant Europe's calm intervention diffused the confrontation until military police arrived. Quote, "He really showed his mettle and his ability to handle men in that very unpleasant episode," end quote, Sissel recalled. Renamed the U.S. 369th Infantry Regiment, they were assigned to the U.S. Army Services of Supply, unloading ships and other unflattering duties. But General John Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in Europe, soon offered the 369th to the French Army to solve a political problem. The French and British were demanding American reinforcements for their badly depleted divisions. Pershing, under orders from the president, had insisted on forming an independent American force in France to preserve troop morale and accountability for American casualties and to strengthen the president's clout in eventual peace talks.
General John Pershing was not in favor of having black soldiers in combat. However, he eventually recognized their value and he made an exception for the black soldiers of the 369th Regiment, reassigning them to the French on March 10th. You must understand that during those times, the attitudes about black soldiers was not very favorable. Yes, folks, a little more than 100 years ago, the Harlem Hell Fighters bravely led the U.S. into World War I. Their courage made the headlines across the country and across the world, hailing the African American regiment as heroes even as they faced discrimination at home. Now that's the shame of it. You go overseas, you fight, you die, and you win wars, but you come back home and you're discriminated against. Two of the prominent members of the 369th Infantry were Private Henry Johnson and Neiman Roberts. Johnson and Roberts became the first Americans to receive the French Quadrillere for their heroics during World War I. These awards were the first of many honors awarded to the 369th Infantry Regiment, better known as the Harlem Hell Fighters. After 3 weeks training by French troops, the 369th entered the combat trenches on April 15, 1918, more than a month before the American Expeditionary Force's first major battle. For 3 months, as the German-sprung offense raged dozens of miles to the northwest, the 369th manned the front line and fought occasional skirmishes, including Johnson and Roberts' battle against the German Raging Party, which was epic and made headlines around the world. American reporters' accounts of their heroics reached home within days. The headlines read, 2 New York Negro soldiers foil German assault, declared the New York World's lead headline on May 20th, 1918. You have to understand that that was a big deal back then. There was no television, no ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. So to be in the headlines, you were a bona fide hero. And that was pretty much the extent of the coverage that people got back then. And ironically, the same general who was reluctant to send the Hellfighters to fight praised them in the press. The headlines read, General Pershing praises brave Negroes in a New York Sun headline the next day. See, such stories made Johnson and Roberts 2 of the best-known American soldiers in World War I. And this was at a time when U.S. troops either hadn't yet arrived in France or were training. The Harlem Hellfighters made news around the world. As part of the Meuse-Argonne offense, in which more than 1 million American and French troops attacked the German lines, the 369th suffered some of the worst casualties suffered by an American regiment in war. With 144 killed and almost 1,000 wounded, the Hellfighters' story of wartime valor brought mixed results as the veterans re-entered American society. Again, it is shameful to think that even those black men and women who fought in every war in this country, including the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, etc., and of course, the Vietnam Wars, black fighters has proven their patriotism time and time again. And unfortunately, some soldiers have come back to be lynched in uniform. What a shame. This is the ultimate sign of disrespect. But make absolutely no mistake about it. Black people have fought in every war as stated, and we are just as patriotic as anybody else. Unfortunately, that patriotism oftentimes is not reciprocal. We would like to point out that 97 years after the battle in France, President Obama awarded Johnson the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award.
Thanks for watching.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, thou art rich.